In the heart of Wyoming, under a vast, clear blue sky, a harrowing struggle for survival was unfolding, one that defied all expectations. Blaze, a wild mustang who had once roamed freely across the plains, now staggered through a dense forest. His legs buckled under the weight of exhaustion and pain, his once glorious chestnut coat now matted with blood. Each desperate breath came in labored gasps. He had been abandoned, left behind after a brutal clash with another stallion. Yet the agony coursing through his body was overshadowed by a more immediate and terrifying danger, a pack of wolves. Their eyes gleamed from the shadows, and their hunger hung thick in the air like a palpable force. Blaze had no idea how much longer he could keep going. The wolves were closing in, their senses sharp, and they knew his vulnerability meant an easy kill. They were relentless, and the odds against him seemed insurmountable. The world appeared to have turned its back on Blaze, but just when all hope seemed lost, something extraordinary happened, an event so unexpected it would challenge everything you believed about survival, courage, and the will to fight back. What came next was nothing short of breathtaking. Stumbling through the forest, Blaze's body trembled from sheer exhaustion. His legs wavered, each step more agonizing than the last. The violent fight with the stallion had left him with deep gashes along his flank and a jagged tear on his side. His chestnut coat was stained with blood, and his breathing was uneven and shallow. There was no time to rest, though. The wolves were drawing nearer, their sharp, predatory eyes tracking him from the cover of the trees. The sun hung high in the sky, its golden rays filtering through the canopy of pines, offering no solace. Blaze had always been a proud and untamed mustang, relying on his unmatched strength and speed. But now those gifts felt like distant memories. Once a force of nature, he was reduced to a wounded animal fleeing for his life. Every painful step brought him closer to the realization that this might be the end. In the distance, the faint growls of the pack grew louder and bolder, their confidence swelling with each passing moment. Blaze's ears flicked nervously, straining to detect the slightest sound. The forest around him offered no signs of safety, only the rustling of leaves and the faint chirping of birds. No warning, no footsteps. Then the scent hit him, a pungent mix of wet fur and the unmistakable musk of predators. Blaze's heart thundered as he realized they were directly behind him. He pushed himself harder, desperate to reach the open field he knew was nearby. The trees ahead were thinning, and he could almost feel the fresh breeze of freedom, the scent of open grass, and the endless expanse of sky. But with every strained step, the wolves drew closer, the gap between them shrinking alarmingly fast. His muscles burned, screaming in protest, and his vision blurred from the unrelenting pain. Blaze's mind raced, frantically searching for an escape. There were so few places left to run. His strength was fading rapidly, and he doubted he could go on much longer. The world around him began to fade into a haze, his focus narrowing to the sound of the wolves in pursuit. Suddenly, the silence chattered. A rustling sound was followed by the snarl of the lead wolf. Blaze's eyes widened in terror as the first wolf lunged. Instinctively, he twisted his body and bolted, his legs pumping with every ounce of strength he had left. His hooves struck the earth in a desperate rhythm, but the wolves were right behind him, their breath hot on his heels. With every painful stride, the wound in Blaze's side flared, and his legs felt as if they were weighed down by lead. He could feel the wolves' sharp teeth snapping at his heels, their snarls echoing like a haunting melody through the forest. Adrenaline surged through him, pushing him forward, but it wasn't enough. His breaths were shallow and uneven, and the trees around him blurred into a chaotic backdrop. Blaze knew he couldn't outrun them much longer. As despair gripped him, something miraculous happened. A movement in the trees caught his eye, a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a human. Blaze's heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Was someone there to save him? His hooves pounded against the earth as his body faltered, growing weaker with every passing moment. Blood dripped from his wounds, and fear hung thick in the air. The wolves were relentless, their growls and snarls filling the forest with an ominous cadence. Blaze felt a sense of helplessness he had never known before, his once mighty spirit battered by the unrelenting chase. Blaze's body, once strong and untamed, no longer held the power to fend off the relentless attack. As the lead wolf lunged at him again, his instincts drove him to veer left, his legs faltering under the strain. He struggled to maintain his balance, but exhaustion clouded his vision. He knew he couldn't keep running indefinitely. His muscles screamed in protest, and a sharp pain throbbed in his side with every step. Just as he felt his strength give way, a commanding voice pierced through the chaos, cutting through his despair like a bolt of lightning. "Get away from him," the voice demanded. Blaze's head snapped toward the sound, and through his haze of fatigue he saw her. A tall, commanding woman emerged from the shadows of the trees into the clearing. Her dark brown hair was tightly braided, her worn yet practical clothing hinted at experience, and a rifle rested securely on her shoulder. Her piercing eyes radiated focus and determination, and every movement she made was deliberate and confident. For a fleeting moment the wolves paused, their aggression tempered by the sudden shift in the air. Blaze's heart, pounding moments earlier with despair, now beat with a flicker of hope. "Step back," the woman ordered, her voice firm and unwavering. Blaze noticed her gaze flickered toward the pack, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. She was calculating, fearless. The lead wolf growled, its yellow eyes glinting with hunger, but the woman didn't flinch. She raised her rifle, aiming it precisely at the pack. "Leave now," she demanded. "You've already caused enough harm." The wolves, sensing a shift, began to back away slowly, their eyes darting between Blaze and the woman. There was a moment of stillness, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Blaze sagged with relief. He couldn't believe he was no longer alone in his fight for survival. The woman lowered her rifle but maintained a steady stance. She took slow steps toward Blaze, her eyes scanning his injured form. "You're not safe yet," she murmured, more to herself than to Blaze. She moved cautiously, never taking her eyes off the Mustang. Exhausted, Blaze stood trembling, unsure if he could trust the stranger, yet something about her presence eased his fears. She wasn't afraid, she was in control. "Easy boy," she whispered, approaching him. Her hand reached out toward Blaze's quivering body, and despite his wariness, fatigue overtook his hesitation. He allowed her to come closer, her fingers brushing gently along his side as she assessed his wounds. Her touch was soft yet firm, filled with determination and compassion. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she murmured, her voice a soothing balm amid the chaos. Blaze exhaled shakily, his body shaking from both fear and the unfamiliar sense of safety she provided. She moved with purpose, her touch calm and steady, as though she had done this countless times before. In the distance, the wolves began to retreat, their growls fading as they left the clearing, but Blaze remained motionless, feeling the gentle pressure of her hand against his side. Her presence felt like a lifeline. "Come on, let's get you out of here," she said softly, her voice filled with resolve. Blaze took a cautious step forward, his muscles protesting, but the woman was there to guide him. Her touch steadied him as they made their way toward the safety of the trees. Blaze could hardly believe it. After all the pain and fear, there was someone who cared, someone who saw him not just as a Mustang, but as a soul in need of help. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to trust again. As they moved through the dense forest, Blaze realized the woman was no stranger to hardship. She moved gracefully, guiding him gently yet purposefully. Each step she took grounded him, and for the first time in days he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The forest was now quiet, the chaos of the wolves fading into a distant memory. Only the rustling leaves and soft sounds of nature filled the air. Blaze felt the weight of his injuries, the cuts, bruises, and deep ache in his ribs. But there was also a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He wasn't alone anymore. The woman led him to a small clearing where a narrow trail wound its way toward a modest cabin, constructed from timber and stone, with smoke rising lazily from the chimney. It looked like a safe haven, a sanctuary amidst the wild. Stopping at the edge of the clearing, the woman turned to face Blaze, her brow furrowed as she assessed his injuries. He could see empathy in her eyes, coupled with an unwavering determination that made him trust her even more. "All right, big guy," she said softly, her voice warm. "We're almost there." Blaze took a deep breath, feeling the strain in his chest as he stood still. He wanted to push forward, but his body refused to cooperate. "Hey, it's okay. You made it this far," the woman continued, her hand resting gently on his neck. "You're strong, and you're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." Her words were a balm to his broken spirit, soothing the panic that had gripped him for days. Slowly he moved forward, each cautious step taken with renewed determination. The woman walked beside him, her hand still on his side, guiding him toward the cabin. As they reached the cabin, Blaze heard the sound of a door creaking open. A man stepped out, tall and weathered, his deep voice hinting at years spent working the land. "Lena, you made it back," the man said, his gaze falling on Blaze. There was no surprise or judgment in his eyes, only a quiet understanding. He stepped aside, allowing Lena and Blaze to enter. Inside, the cabin was warm, with the flickering light of a fire casting a soft glow across the room. A simple wooden table occupied the center, accompanied by a few chairs and shelves filled with tools and supplies. Blaze noticed the care that had gone into organizing the space. It was clearly meant for healing. Lena assisted him inside, guiding him to a makeshift stall where he could rest. She moved with efficiency, yet her touch was tender as she gently coaxed Blaze into the space, ensuring his comfort. The man who appeared to be Lena's partner watched them quietly, saying little, but an expression of deep respect shone in his eyes. He understood what it meant to save an animal like Blaze. "You're safe now," Lena murmured, kneeling beside him as she began to tend to his wounds. Her movements were careful and precise, and for the first time in days, Blaze felt himself begin to relax. He could feel the warmth of the fire, the scent of herbs in the air, and Lena's steady presence beside him. The cabin, with its quiet beauty and comfort, was a world away from the forest where he had been abandoned. Blaze lowered his head, exhaustion washing over him. His body ached, but here he found a sense of peace, a feeling of belonging that he hadn't experienced in so long. Lena continued her work, her hands gentle as she cleaned his wounds. Blaze's heart began to settle, its frantic beat slowing as he realized he was no longer just surviving. He was healing. "You've been through so much," Lena said quietly, almost to herself, "but you're stronger than you know." Blaze nicked softly, meeting her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a bond that transcended words. A silent promise between them that he would heal, and in return, Lena would help him find his way back to himself. "Thank you," he seemed to say in his own way, as he closed his eyes and drifted into a peaceful slumber. The days that followed settled into a slow, steady rhythm. Lena worked tirelessly, caring for Blaze with a mix of skill and compassion, reflecting her deep knowledge of animals. The man, whose name was Ethan, helped when he could, offering Blaze food and water, but it was clear that the bond between Lena and the Mustang grew stronger each day. Blaze's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. His once dull and matted coat began to shine under the care of his new guardians. His movements remained tentative, but he was walking again, each step taken with more confidence than the last. The pain that had once gripped him was fading, replaced by the strength that had always been within him, waiting to be awakened. Yet there were moments of doubt when Blaze would stop and gaze out the cabin's window, his eyes lost in the forest beyond. Lena noticed this and understood that Blaze was not yet free from the trauma he had endured. It would take time for him to fully trust again and to believe he was truly safe. One afternoon, Lena led Blaze out into the open field behind the cabin, a lush stretch of green extending toward the distant mountains. The sun hung high, casting a warm golden light over everything, while a gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. Blaze stood still, scanning the landscape. His muscles rippled beneath his coat as he shifted, and Lena sensed the energy that still pulsed through him, the wildness and independence. She knew he wasn't completely tamed yet, and perhaps he never would be, but that was part of who he was. Lena had no desire to break that spirit. She wanted him to be free in every sense. Standing beside him, she gently stroked his mane. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly, her words meant for both him and herself. "I know you've been through hell, but you're here now, and we're going to keep moving forward." Blaze snorted softly, a sound echoing his agreement. He was ready, he just needed a little more time. As Lena took a step back, she decided it was time to push him a little further. She grabbed a rope from the small wooden shed nearby and secured it around Blaze's neck, not as a means of control, but as a way to guide him. The bond between them was still new, fragile in places, but it was growing stronger each day. Blaze tensed as she fastened the rope, but Lena remained calm, her touch gentle yet firm. She led him a few steps forward, testing his strength and willingness to move with her. Blaze hesitated for a moment, but realizing Lena wasn't forcing him, he began to walk beside her, his stride long and powerful. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Blaze moved freely, unencumbered by fear. The open field before him transformed from a reminder of abandonment into a place of opportunity, a space for both physical and emotional healing. Lena smiled to herself as she watched Blaze move with more grace than he had ever shown. It was a small step, but an important one. She allowed herself to believe that Blaze's recovery was not just about physical healing, but also about reclaiming his life and freedom. However, just as she began to feel a sense of relief, a familiar sound cut through the air, low growls, a chorus of wolves lurking at the edge of the forest. Blaze's ears pricked up, his body going rigid as the terror associated with his chains returned in an instant. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She sensed the tension in the air and the sudden shift in Blaze's demeanor. She knew the wolves were near, closer than she wanted to admit. Blaze's instincts kicked in, and she could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Blaze, no," she murmured, her voice steady yet firm. "We're safe here. They won't hurt you." But Blaze was no longer listening. His legs quivered, ready to bolt at any moment. His wild instincts conflicted with the trust he had begun to build with Lena. He wanted to run. The bond between them held him back just enough to pause. The wolves' growls grew louder, more persistent, as if sensing Blaze's vulnerability and closing in once again. Lena took a deep breath, trying to keep her own fear at bay. She knew this moment would come. Blaze would have to confront his demons, just as she had faced hers. But the stakes were higher now. Blaze's trust in her was fragile, and if she couldn't reassure him, everything they had worked for might unravel. "Blaze, listen to me," Lena said, stepping in front of him. She stood tall, refusing to show fear, her voice commanding. "We are not going anywhere. You're not alone. Do you hear me?" Blaze's eyes met hers, his body trembling as he stood caught between primal instincts and the safety Lena offered. He hesitated, the wolves' growls intensifying with each passing second. Then, just as Lena felt her heart tighten with dread, Blaze took a step forward, his legs shaking but determined. He didn't flee, he held his ground. Lena felt a rush of pride as Blaze stood firm. The wolves may have circled, but Blaze wasn't going to run anymore. He had found his strength and was ready to face whatever came next. Lena's heart raced as the wolves encroached, their growls echoing through the trees. Blaze stood strong beside her, though his body still trembled with memories of his past, his abandonment, the wild forest, and the struggle for survival. But now something had shifted. He was no longer just a wounded Mustang. He was a survivor, and so was she. The wolves continued their approach, their eyes glinting in the fading sunlight, their bodies low to the ground, ready to strike. Lena felt the tension in the air, the instinctual pull of the forest, and the weight of Blaze's past fear threatening to overtake them. She had to act quickly, or everything they had built would be lost. "Stay close, Blaze," she whispered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She knew that their connection, however new, was their greatest strength. If they could stay together, if Blaze could trust her now, they could face anything. The wolves paused, their eyes flickering between Lena and Blaze, sensing the power in their unity. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Lena felt the wild energy of the wolves, the pull of the forest, and the weight of Blaze's past fear. But surprisingly, Blaze didn't back down. His gaze was fixed on the wolves, his body still quivering but determined. Blaze was a Mustang, wild by nature, and he refused to be ruled by fear any longer. Lena stepped forward, positioning herself between Blaze and the wolves. Although she had no weapons and no means to fight back except for her will and the bond she had forged with Blaze, she stood firm. "We don't want trouble," she called out to the wolves, her voice rising in volume as she tried to assert dominance without aggression. "Go back to the forest. This is not your fight." Sensing the tension and unity between Lena and Blaze, the wolves hesitated. They were not foolish. They had been circling the Mustang, testing for weakness. However, they had not anticipated the resolve that Lena had instilled in Blaze. For a moment, the wolves stared, their growls softening before they retreated into the shadows of the trees. Lena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The immediate threat was gone, but she understood that Blaze was still emotionally fragile, carrying the scars of his past. Blaze, standing tall, let out a soft snort as he relaxed slightly. His eyes were still wild, but the flicker of trust that Lena had nurtured was growing stronger. Lena turned to him, pride swelling in her heart. "You did it," she whispered, stepping closer to run her fingers through his mane. "You stood your ground. You're not that horse anymore. You're not the one who was chained in the forest. You're free now." Blaze nickered softly, his body still trembling, but now it was from the adrenaline rush, an acknowledgement that he had fought not just the wolves, but the ghosts of his past. Lena remained close, allowing him to process everything. He wasn't ready to follow her lead just yet, but they had crossed a significant threshold. Blaze was no longer just a wounded animal. He had become a companion, a friend, and possibly even a protector. As the sun sank lower, bathing the world in golden hues, Lena felt a deep gratitude wash over her. The confrontation with the wolves had tested their bond and the trust they had built together, and they had succeeded. Blaze was no longer a prisoner of his past. He was a horse on the path to healing, just like Lena. They were both learning what it meant to trust again, finding strength in one another. As day turned to night and stars began to twinkle, Lena whispered, "We'll keep moving forward, Blaze, together." In that moment, she knew that nothing, not even the wild wolves or the memories of his past, could tear them apart. They had forged a bond stronger than anything they had faced before, and they were ready for whatever lay ahead. The wind picked up as Lena and Blaze ventured deeper into the forest. The sun had long set, and the world was illuminated by the silvery glow of the moon. Lena's senses heightened, her eyes scanning the woods for signs of danger. But this time she felt invincible with Blaze by her side. However, the forest had a way of testing those who dared enter. The deeper they ventured, the denser the trees grew, until shadows seemed to envelop them. The air became thick with moisture, carrying the scent of pine, and an unsettling silence blanketed the land. Lena felt it in her bones. Something was coming. Blaze also sensed the shift in the atmosphere. His ears were pricked, his eyes alert, and his body tense. The mustang, once fearful of the world, now stood strong and resilient, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different tonight. Lena paused, glancing up at the sky where dark clouds gathered, moving in swiftly from the horizon. A storm was approaching, a bad one. They needed to find shelter quickly, but it was too late. The first raindrops fell, fast and heavy, accompanied by a sharp crack of thunder. The wind howled through the trees as the storm unleashed its fury. Panic surged within Lena. She had faced storms before, but this one felt more violent and unpredictable. In this wild, untamed place, there was no shelter. Blaze's coat was already soaked, his muscles tense as he shifted nervously. The storm raged around them, trees bending under the wind, and the air crackled with electricity. Lena knew they couldn't remain exposed. They needed cover. With determination, she grabbed the reins and urged Blaze forward. Now wary but trusting her, Blaze moved swiftly, his hooves splashing through the mud as they raced toward a small hill in the distance. Lena's heart pounded as they battled the storm, the wind screaming in their ears. The rain fell harder, soaking them to the bone, and the ground turned to muck. Yet Blaze pressed on, his hooves slipping but finding grip time and again. Drenched, Lena didn't care. Her focus was solely on getting them to safety. Finally, they reached the hill and found a small rock outcrop that offered enough cover to shield them from the worst of the storm. Lena sighed in relief as she slid off Blaze's back, her legs shaky from the adrenaline. She patted his side, her fingers brushing over his wet coat. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. Blaze nickered softly, his eyes wide and alert, but his body relaxed now that they were safe. The storm howled around them, but in that small shelter they found a moment of peace. Lena leaned against the rock for support, while Blaze stood beside her, his head lowered, still trembling but now from the cold rather than fear. They were both exhausted, but a deeper connection had formed between them. It was not just the physical journey they had undergone or the wild forces they had faced. It was the emotional journey, the healing they had both experienced. Blaze had learned to trust again, and Lena had realized that she wasn't alone, that she could be strong and vulnerable simultaneously. The storm raged on through the night, but in their small shelter they were safe. Together they had weathered another storm, both literally and figuratively. As the night deepened, Lena reflected on the journey ahead. The storm would pass, just as all things do, and when it did, they would move forward, stronger and more connected than ever. As dawn broke, the storm had left the forest soaked and shimmering. The sun pierced through the clouds, casting golden rays across the landscape. The world had been cleansed by the tempest, and a sense of calm settled over the land. Lena awoke to the sound of chirping birds, the air fresh and crisp. A few feet away, Blaze stood, his coat glistening with dew, his muscles rippling from the exertion of the previous night. For a moment, Lena simply watched him, appreciating not just his strength and determination, but also how they had helped one another heal. The bond they shared was deeper than she had ever imagined. It wasn't merely a rescue story, but one of mutual salvation. The morning light illuminated Blaze's face, and for the first time, Lena truly grasped the significance of how far they had come. They were not just survivors of the forest. They were survivors of a life that had tried to break them, of a world that had been unkind. Yet here they stood, strong and ready for whatever lay ahead. Lena moved closer, reaching out to gently brush her fingers through Blaze's mane. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment there was silence, a moment of pure understanding. They didn't need words. Everything they had experienced together had forged a connection that required no explanation. "Are you ready?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Blaze nickered softly, his tail swishing with a quiet energy that made her smile. He was ready, just as she was. The two began walking again, the ground still damp beneath their feet but no longer treacherous. The trees parted as they made their way toward the open field, and Lena felt the familiar weight of the reins in her hands. Once afraid of this journey and uncertain of where it would lead, she now felt more certain than ever with Blaze by her side. The path ahead was still unclear, more obstacles and challenges awaited. But they had faced the worst of it, and they would keep moving forward. As they reached the edge of the forest, the vast open plain stretched out before them, an endless world filled with possibilities. Lena felt her breath catch as the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of something new. Blaze lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes scanning the horizon. Lena felt it too, the excitement of the unknown, the pull of something greater than they had ever known. Swinging her leg over Blaze's back, she settled into the saddle with an ease born from the bond they had built. For the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger to this life. She felt like she had found her place in the world. "Let's go," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. Blaze responded with a soft snort and a gentle nudge, and together they began to move forward. The wind caught in Blaze's mane as they galloped across the plains, the open space before them representing freedom in its purest form. The sun rose higher in the sky, its golden light reflecting off the landscape. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt truly alive. She didn't know what the future held, but with Blaze by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. They had fought for this moment, and together they would continue to fight. For each other and the journey ahead. They were no longer broken. They were whole. Lena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger than ever before. The journey of Lena and Blaze was more than mere survival. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the transformative power of an unbreakable bond. They had confronted their fears, overcome unimaginable odds, and emerged stronger, not just as rider and horse, but as partners who had found their place in a vast, uncertain world. Their story serves as a reminder that no matter how dark the path may seem, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel.